So yes, nothing like waking up to one of your most anticipated games of the entire year, absolutely smashing it in the early reviews. This, ladies and gents, is what happens when you keep around at least 80 to 90% of the original development team and also make an absolute banger of a game. You get universal praise and at least a 90 plus Metacritic score, which is the case with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as well. Right now sitting at about 93 to 94 out of 100. So yeah, in the meantime, totally check out the demo. We of course will have a very eventful week following the next 7 days. It seems that early copies are out in the wild, so you can totally expect leaks to happen within the next few days, which is why I recommend staying off YouTube and especially Twitter or TikTok. And yeah, finally, we also know now that work on the third and final installment has already begun, at least on a draft or an initial script. So let's talk about it. Now, one thing I found really interesting is that most media outlets agreed that Rebirth's open world is actually really well made, and in the case of IGN, for example, they agreed that it manages to transcend its well-worn open world design. And this is something that I talked a bit in my early preview of the game, the fact that even though we have all of these systems and features that were already present in other open world games pretty much within the past decade, yeah, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth does it in a very fun and very organic way, to the point that it feels appropriate to the way they handle open world. So let me explain. One of the things that they've done is that they implemented this intel, the world intel research. Pretty much you get it from Chadley, and everything that you discover in the open world, there's a reason for you to go out there and do so, because this will feed into that world intel, which in turn further goes into a more overarching sort of progression system that gives you better materia, better access to summons, better fights, and all the other cool challenges. It's not just disjointed and things thrown out on the map just for you to go out there to get. It's actually part of something that you truly feel it's big and will lead to something important. IGN actually explains it really well. The more you peel back the layers of all the activities that fill these zones, the more engrossed you get in clearing every single icon you find on the map. That context made it more than just a checklist of chores. And if you try out the demo, you will pretty much reach the same conclusion. You will notice that there are encounters on the map or maybe interesting things to find that are part of that world intel, but this is going to eventually also unlock new things for you, besides just, of course, providing you the immediate result of getting levels and materials and even items, or just like the fun of defeating very powerful enemies. And obviously none of this would be even half as interesting if the game didn't look really good. And by that I don't necessarily mean just like graphics wise, but art style, how grand the scenes look, and how like the visual spectacle hits you when you see it from afar, especially when you look at some of the scenes even in the Junon region, which is also available in the demo. This is on a scale that we have never seen in the remake at all. And keep in mind that Midgar is actually an absolutely massive city. It's just that that game could simply not contain all of it. Maybe this is something that we will see in the third installment, but until then, some of these shots look absolutely incredible. And the difference between all of these regions and their significance to the story almost makes them feel like their very own distinct characters. And you can especially see the contrast of some of them, like for example being in the Costa del Sol vibrant beachside next to the barren wasteland of Corel, and of course seeing all the wasteland over there because of the gold saucer's energy demand. Spending time with other characters was another thing that I absolutely loved in the first game, and one of the things that they further expanded upon in a big way. And I've talked about this before, but there's actually a lot more than I initially thought they would do, in the sense that there's pretty much a side story that involves characters at all points of the game. At any point you find a side quest, somebody from the party will be involved in it, and this is going to give you a lot more opportunities to learn more about those characters, especially if you really enjoy the company of some of them. You can learn more about their background. I mean, at the end of the day, this is one of the most defining RPGs of all time, so doing RPG things is probably something that you're going to want to do. But even just to the level of gameplay, the way you can change your party and adopt playstyles and change things around, have different synergies, And it's very easy to just look over this and say, well, yeah, that's expected. This is Final Fantasy VII. But at the same time, how many games out there give you the possibility to play with so many different characters and have such a deep level of customization when it comes to the combat options that you have for each and every single one of them, and then have another layer on top which involves the synergies that they can now create. So I've seen some commentary online mentioning that for some reason Rebirth has a downgrade to quality of the combat compared to Remake, which makes absolutely no sense. If you played this game for even 5 seconds, you will already notice that it's on a completely different scale. First of all, because it builds upon what was already great in the remake and then adds a whole bunch of new mechanics. You have the team level, you have the synergy abilities and the synergy skills, you have some of the new materia. There are so many of them that I've noticed just in the demo, and so many other options when it comes to gear, crafting it, equipping your characters, and all the cool new effects and synergies that you get along the way. To the point that the way you approach combat now is quite significantly different than ever before, and now you might want to pay more attention to party synergy, especially when it comes to different effects that you want to achieve or different weaknesses that you want to exploit. Now, in the first game, you kinda could at some points just button mash your way through certain fights. Even though you can probably still do that, you're going to get a lot more kick out of it if you actually play it properly, if you take advantage of those synergies and the way you can exploit enemy weaknesses. So there was, for example, this synergy between Cloud and Tifa that would set your sword on fire, and you could reach like 2000 damage easily even in the demo, which if you play the remake, you probably already know that that is a very good amount of damage with the level of gear that we have at that stage. And it was also at around level 22 or 23, but this is like synergy that I'm talking about, which is going to absolutely make you respect the fight, but also do it properly if you get to learn the ropes. But yeah, these are just a couple of reasons why I would be willing to go the extra mile and spend a little bit extra on a video game, because the company doesn't just go purely for the profit, it also goes for the fans. And I think that that is pretty evident in the case of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Yeah, I think that Square Enix kind of found its groove, its sweet spot. They kind of had a few duds in the past few years, especially with games like Forspoken and also Final Fantasy 16. I'm not gonna lie, some of the design choices over there I really did not like, especially when it came to the really boring side quests. It seems that Rebirth is on the complete opposite. Really interesting side stories, really engaging, very good narrative. But one other thing that they have done is that they didn't actually fire their developers on the first day of the release after the remake. They actually kept around 80 to 90% of the original developers and people working on the remake, on the Rebirth as well. So this is one of the secrets that the game's creative director also shared in one of these Bloomberg articles. So that this was a trait that many other video game studios don't seem to prioritize, which is team chemistry. He explains between 80 and 90% of the Final Fantasy VII Remake development team stuck around to make Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which allowed for more efficient development even during the height of the pandemic. It was quite clear who to go to if we had a certain question or problem we were trying to solve. Yamaguchi said we were able to work together as a team, achieve this great flow and tempo of game developments. You really don't see that happening nowadays with most AAA companies out there, which still baffles me to this day. I mean, why get all the people involved with the original out of the studio when they could easily implement everything that needs to be implemented in the sequel as well, especially when you know you're working on multiple sequels at a time. This still baffles me to this day, but that's the situation when you have shareholders involved that only look for profit and nothing like when it comes to the consumer. So my heart really goes to some of the projects that unfortunately have been lost this year, and some of the big developers that took risky bets that didn't play out, with some very recent examples, unfortunately. But there's one other disclaimer over here that we have to go over, which is the fact that the launch of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is nearby, and we already have copies out there in the wild already being delivered, so totally expect leaks to happen really soon. Again, totally suggesting stay off YouTube and, well, Twitter and TikTok for now. Obviously, we will not post any of this spoiler content on the channel. It's purely going to be gameplay guides and like early stage footage. But we have this message from the game's creative director, who urges everybody who does get a chance to play the game early to at least include spoiler warnings as to not affect the experience of those who have yet to play the game. And he explains, I would also be very grateful if you could refrain from using any scenes from those vital parts of the story in your video thumbnails. We deliberately did not restrict the record and share functions for any areas in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, as we want you to be able to share and comment on your gameplay experience. So they even put out some of these guidelines over here. It seems that they will also try to actively take down some of this content at the very least, but of course the full extent on it you can find it on that page on Square Enix website. You can find also related to that post. All in all, really excited for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Also, let me know down below what's your opinion of it now that you've seen all of the reviews. Are you more or less excited now that you have seen all of the reviews? In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.